Right, so I think we can start. It's a very hot day today, so a lot of people haven't actually made it to come here and be here in person. But we have quite a lot of people listening and watching us online. And this session will be recorded so that people who can't see us now can watch it later. Warm welcome to you all. What we are going to do today is what we have done for some years now, and that is to have a debriefing session on the last Königswinter Conference, just to tell you and discuss with you a little bit what we did, what we discussed, what the issues were. I suppose we'll be here for about an hour or so. And please raise any questions you may have, and with the help of our excellent panelists, we'll try and answer them. Now, to introduce the panelists, a very special welcome to Julie Smith, Baroness Smith, who was present at the Königswinter Conference and will be telling us about it by a wonderful coincidence. She is in Berlin anyway and has agreed to join us. Thank you very much indeed. Warm welcome to Anne-Ruth Herkes, and the news is that Anne-Ruth Herkes was elected chair of Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft a few moments ago, taking over from Thomas Matusek, and she was at the Königswinter Conference, of course, and she will add her impressions and take good care to take what we tell her into the next Königswinter Conference. Then we have on my left Mari Mittelhaus, who is the executive director of the Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft, the one who organizes our events, Königswinter, and anything and everything else that happens to occur. She was elected to the board last year, so she is now the acting board member in charge of operations, and may now term herself the executive director. And far left, on my far left, it's John Kampfner, who is a very well-known journalist, for one, and who is now the deputy chairman of Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft. He is also in charge of the Young Königswinter Conference, which this year would only happen in the autumn, so we can't talk about that yet. But he was at Königswinter, of course, and with a very precise view on German-British relations and a long-term view on German-British relations, he will also contribute. Königswinter 2025 was the 75th Königswinter Conference, and for that reason we held it in Berlin in the North Rhine-Westphalia representation, which has a huge amount of advantages. A wonderful venue, and you can go and walk in the Tiergarten if you feel like it, and there were wonderful hosts. The disadvantage is that people would come and go, because of course there's a lot to do and a lot to see in Berlin. If we put everybody up in Neuhardenberg, which is miles from anywhere, they have to stick it. If you have it in the center of Berlin, people come and go. But that's that's it. What we were trying to do and trying to achieve at Königswinter was to rethink German-British relations. Brexit is sort of over with. Nobody wants to talk about Brexit these days. I suppose I'm right in saying this for about everybody. Everybody feels relieved that we're back to a very sort of cordial, normal footing on which to talk. On the other hand, of course, we have huge challenges. geopolitical, security, economic challenges which we're facing and we're facing together. And so that was very much the sort of the central theme. How do we face these challenges together? As usual, we worked in working groups, and I may tell you that the insistence on having working groups is very much a German insistence. Our UK counterparts would prefer to have it all in plenary sessions. And we've always insisted on having these working groups, but we've always felt that the discussion gets much more dense and reaches another level. To sit around the table. We actually got as far as Neuhardenberg in that one group at least sat outside, which Neuhardenberg sort of always happens sitting under one of these wonderful trees. But even in Berlin, we managed to sit outside and have a discussion. We tried to have a very mixed sort of group of people in each group, and we will hear in a moment from each group what they came up with. And a novelty of this Königswinter Conference was that at the very end, the two chairs, which was Ambassador Matusik and Honorable David Lidington, actually composed a brief final sort of statement, which was then sent to the heads of government of both UK and Germany. It was felt that it would be necessary to produce a sort of result like that, not just the way I said we've had a wonderful conversation, but to produce this kind of result. We are well aware, of course, that it will not be read word by word intensely by either the Prime Minister or the Chancellor, but in their sort of private offices, it might very well, because we have a lot of Anglo-German things coming up, new arrangements, new issues, as you can follow in the press. The new German Chancellor and the not quite so new Prime Minister seem to get on quite well and agree on a number of issues. So what we can contribute as a civil society organization, I think is worthwhile contributing. So before I turn to the three people who will talk about what they experienced in the working groups, I would ask Anna Muthakis, would you like to comment in any way?
Well, thank you very much, Rupert. I'm delighted to be here and to welcome the Baroness and you all. The struggle this year has been to find the right dates for this Königswinter Conference, and being the 75th Königswinter Conference, there was this endeavor and this ambition to make it a very special date, and every date could have been wrong, given the early elections in Germany and the very tense geopolitical agenda and European general bilateral agenda. So we sort of zoomed in on this May day, and I think we were lucky. We had some great decision makers attending, and certainly we were able to make the point that Königswinter is here, alive and kicking, and feeling the pulse of the day, and so rather than me now sharing with you detailed impressions, I want to share the sense that we will want in the next for the rest of the year to land the Königswinter brand again with the German government, but also with your permission with the British government, in order to Very true. Can you hear me?
Andrea, irgendwer im Call.
So I hope we get rid of the echo. Not quite.
Yes.
All right, very good, very good. So what I would like to say is that we have had preliminary conversations with the German government, but also with the British ambassador here to see whether once the next bilateral treaty, the friendship treaty, is ready for signing or ready for presentation to the public, we want Königswinter to be the place where that happens. That is the ambition for the rest of the year, in addition to the very important Young Königswinter Conference that comes up in October, and the equally extremely important Defense Königswinter that will happen end of November. The conversations that happened in May at this year's Königswinter Conference were all conducive to preparing the ground for all of us to understand why we still exist and what it is that we want to achieve. It's easy to go to the foreign offices and to say this is what we would like to do, and they are well educated and supportive, but the proof is in the pudding, as you would say. So this is what I'm planning on doing, and with that, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. And I would now turn to you, Julie, and the microphone is sort of near you anyway. And you just give us your feedback, your impressions.
Thank you. I probably should explain to those of you who have no idea who I am, and those of you who wonder why I suddenly turned up like a bad penny for 2 feedback sessions running. My day job is as an academic in Cambridge, where historically my academic work has been on democracy in Europe. But my other interest is in the UK's bilateral relations. And I should actually do bilateral relations, I think, in the Baltic states where it's a bit cooler. My voice is giving up now. But in particular, I decided that for my sabbatical, which is the academic year 24-25, so last October to this coming October, that it's time to do some academic work on the UK's bilateral relations with Germany. And I was in Cologne a couple of weeks ago, impressed by an academic colleague of whom some of you will have heard, Wolfgang Wessels, who focuses mostly on European politics. It's very much, well, why do you want to do British-German politics? It's always, if the European Union's not in the title, why are you even bothering? But it's precisely because the bilateral relations between the UK and Germany have been so important in the post-war period. And it's a relationship that has mattered to our country a lot, even though at times it might have looked as if we are a somewhat churlish player in European politics. So I went to Young Königswinter in 1994, and I also attended the parallel event, which sadly no longer happens, which was the British-German Forum, which used to be hosted at Wilton Park. And Wilton Park, of course, also has the background of being somewhere that was very much about fostering British-German relations in the aftermath of World War II. So I know Gisela Stewart, who is this sort of official head, the titular head of Wilton Park, was also quite keen to have Wilton Park as the place for a signature. So there's a bit of competition. But when I was at an event last week here in Berlin on resetting the UK relations, His Excellency Andrew Mitchell, Ambassador Mitchell, was present. He was extremely discreet, but clearly the naming of the of the treaty is one of the issues that I think is probably about the only thing that's still left to decide. But I think the idea of holding it at Königswinter is a really fascinating idea, because there is a danger that when an institution or an organisation gets to 75, people might think about pensioning it off, might think we don't need to have these conversations anymore. Now, as a member of the House of Lords, my other hat, being an academic, I have to retire when I get to 69, like normal people. In the House of Lords, it's the only place I still count as young, because the average age in the House of Lords is 71. So when I finish my next 14, 15 years in Cambridge, I can carry on in the House of Lords for a bit longer and I'll still be below the average age. So in the Lords, we don't believe in pensioning people off. And clearly, Königswinter is not ready to be pensioned off, but ready for a new lease of life. But I think from the British side, my sense was, having never attended the grown-up Landesvertretung Conference until October of last year, I then attended 2 Königswinters within about 6 months of each other, and been online at the feedback session in December and here today. And my sense was that the event this year in Berlin was a lot more dynamic than last year. But that is partly because I couldn't attend lots last year because it was in London, very close to all that I do in the House of Lords. So because I was invited at 5 days' notice, I was dipping in and out, just the way the German parliamentarians were doing this time. And I think one of the messages that we heard right at the start of Königswinter this year was, maybe it's time to go back to Königswinter, or when we're having meetings in the UK, come back and visit Cambridge again, come to Oxford, because it's just that bit further away, so that people are kept in a room and you carry on the conversations. Whereas when we're in London or Berlin, you're either saying, well, I've got to go back to my office, or if you're visiting, if you're a senior parliamentarian or a senior member of government, what do? You come in, you give a speech, you go and talk to your opposite number, and you go away again. So I think the one thing that was a slight disappointment this year was, you said we got the timing just about right. And we had, it could have been the perfect opportunity for the British government to say, yesterday, Monday the 19th of May, we had an historic meeting with the European Union. We're resetting our relations. And now one of us is here to tell you, Germany, why this matters so much and how our relationships are interrelated. But unfortunately, we didn't have that. We had our Minister for Europe doing an online recording. And I think one of the things that we do need to feed back is that, in order to make sure that everybody understands the importance of this relationship, that we do need some ministers to be taking part, and it shouldn't just be down the line with a pre-recorded video. But in terms of the discussions that we had in Berlin, I think they were very constructive, and they come at absolutely the right time. Königswinter last October came just after the Trinity House Agreement had been signed, and gave the opportunity for a lot of discussion about defence cooperation, and particularly bilateral defence cooperation among the defence industry people. And we had quite a lot of similar people in in Berlin this time. And I think that is important, because keeping some of the relationships going, not just civil society and government to government, or parliament to parliament, or even political party to political party, but actually making sure we bring in industry as well, I think is important. Not least because they can help sponsor the event, but also because if we really want Europe to succeed, and I do mean Europe, I don't want to get down into the nitty-gritty of the European Union versus the UK, but if we really want European cooperation to work, then actually some of it is dependent on those relations with industry. And having people present in the room was incredibly helpful.
Thank you. Now you joined one of the working groups and sat through the whole session. I didn't see you sneak out. So perhaps can you just give us one or two thoughts from the work in your working group?
So I think my working group was perhaps a little more contentious than some of the others. We were looking at foreign and defence policy, but at least one of our number had decided to be provocative. So we were talking in part about support for Ukraine, and most of the participants shared the view that is prevalent at the level of the coalition here and the British government, whether of the Conservative persuasion or now the Labour persuasion, that we must support Ukraine. But there were one or two dissident voices that said, well, surely there comes a point when we need to negotiate change. So, or negotiate a ceasefire. So there were a few discordant voices, but broadly speaking, we were focused much more on areas where we can work together. Clearly, there are some new challenges and potentially new opportunities arising from the change of government in the United States. So last October, we were still looking at the impact of geopolitical situation to our east. We now have the situation of the United States under Donald Trump, which of course is an obvious catalyst for us to work more closely together. So one of the issues that was raised, but I don't think we are anywhere close to a solution, is whether there should be cooperation on nuclear weapons. And that, of course, then gets into all sorts of rather neuralgic discussions about the Non-Proliferation Treaty and what can actually be done within the existing legal framework. And I suppose the problem for the United Kingdom in particular is that however positive the government might be about strong relations with the EU or with particular member states, notably in this context Germany, there is still a default position that says, but we have to work with the United States. And that is precisely because we're part of the Five Eyes intelligence network, but also because our nuclear weapons are made in the United States. They're maintained by the United States. So although technically we have an independent nuclear deterrent, we're not quite as autonomous as the French are with their nuclear weapons.
Well, thank you. So this is food for thought, that certainly is. And I'll turn to the other two who wants to go first. Mary?
I mean, I can continue. I was in group number 3, which was trust and polarization, renewing the democratic promise in the UK and Germany. And if you think about how this worked at the conference, we were meeting over the course of, sort of several hours interrupted by coffee breaks. So you could sort of structure the discussions, and our chair chose to sort of say, okay, let's first diagnose what we think are, the issues why our societies have lost trust, in the two governments, in the government's ability to deliver, and why have our societies become more polarized. So we first spent some time talking about sort of the diagnosis, and then we tried to come up with some ideas for solutions that then also made it into the letter to the two heads of government that you were mentioning earlier. So I think the diagnosis was relatively easy in a way. If you think about it, I think both of our societies in Germany and the UK, we're dealing with similar issues. It's very difficult to get a specialist doctor's appointment if you need one without, a long wait time, particularly, of course, on the NHS. But I think we've all sort of realized that over the course of the last couple of years, this has also become an issue in Germany, unless you are, of course, you have private healthcare. Another point, of course, that we could both sort of share our nightmare stories about is, of course, the Deutsche Bahn, the National Rail in the UK, similar issues, perhaps for different reasons, but the general issue remains that that barely a train running on time in both of our two countries, and also it's very expensive to buy tickets for them in the first place. Then we were also talking about, perhaps the more not directly as, not issues that don't impact your life yet as directly as, for example, a train that's late. So, for example, the perceived inability to combat climate change accurately. I mean, it's, it's very hot outside, so we're definitely also getting, feeling the impact more directly more and more these days. But that was definitely one of the issues. Then, of course, also economic competitiveness, the lack of growth in both of our countries' economies, international cooperation, you also already alluded to it, security, defense. Some people, say can't really go outside on the streets anymore. At least that's a debate that we are having in Germany. If you go out at night, that sort of thing. And then in terms of, like I said, we sort of kind of agreed on all of those issues. The one point where especially the Brits and the Germans particularly disagreed was how to handle, of course, the AfD. So you can imagine, of course, even with, within German society, of course, we have different opinions on, whether a ban is a good idea, whether it's not a good idea, whether it might even be successful or not. But I think, you were there as well. I think that probably the general consensus on the German side was we should probably at least give a ban a try, even if it might not succeed. Whereas the Brits said, absolutely not, banning parties is never a good idea. The democratic mechanism is to deliver pluralism. This is what democracy is all about. This is what elections are about. We need to, sort of deal with the different views and ideally within the democratic system, then sort of, be able to have those discussions and then ideally come back to a consensus. But of course, in a way, that's also the polarization within the group that's already in the title of the session.
Okay, thank you. Did you get the feeling that AfD was sort of the elephant in the room?
Yes, and as you just mentioned as well, Reform UK as well, of course. Okay. There are parallels, there are also differences. I think some Germans perhaps had the feeling, oh, you just wait 2 more years and then you'll have, the same pressing problem, or the problem become at least more pressing than it is right now in the UK. So I think it was more, perhaps it was also too much an elephant in the room. I think my personal view would be that perhaps we focused a bit too much on the AfD discussion. We got a little bit distracted by that because, of course, everyone has an opinion on that. You can spend a long time discussing this, but I probably would have liked to see, some more focus on other solutions, right? Why are people disillusioned with the two governments? Why do people have the feeling, as someone put it, there's no more output legitimacy? A lot of people don't really believe in the government's ability to deliver on issues that they care about, to solve problems that they care about anymore. One issue I didn't even mention was housing, of course, affordable housing. Yeah. So, we didn't solve the housing crisis, but I don't, it's probably a bit too high.
We didn't solve any other crises. But we tried. Anyway, John, why don't you carry on?
So I'll do the specific, and then if I may, I'll just do a few general remarks in the end about Königswinter. On the, do we need that? On the session, well, actually, I also chaired the wrap-up session in which we were looking at these different ones, and I remember it was one of the British delegates, Trevor Phillips, who said, just with reference to your point, that last point, Mari, about the AfD and reform voters and all of that, saying, why don't we talk about why people vote the way they do, rather than what do we do with the parties who they vote for? And it was a very passionate, which brought me to the point. Actually, I was doing this session that introduced them, not ended them. When I basically made the plea, and I'm going to the general person, I'll come back. When I made the plea, please, could we in the course of the next day and a half disagree a lot? Let us not all agree on things. Let's really challenge ourselves and challenge each other, because in forums such as these, not just Königswinter, but the gamut of forums, there's always a tendency to surround ourselves with like-minded people and say similar things. On the specifics, I was on actually the panel that's probably the least controversial, the economics one, which I suppose you could divide into three bits. There's the what do we all do in the face of Donald Trump school, and you can imagine how those conversations went around tariffs and market unpredictability and everything else. There is always the suspicion, I think the suspicion is to a large degree justified, and Julie mentioned it, that when push comes to shove, the Brits always fall into bed with the Americans, and that there will, and it doesn't have to be zero sum, but were it to be that, and that is, and the fact of securing this first trade deal or not really trade deal was seen as, in a sense, a byproduct of that. There were some interesting discussions and very constructive discussions around the bilateral. The area of contention was, as ever, lack of free movement, which is a terribly sore thumb, and Keir Starmer has dug in his heels so much now that it will be impossible, I fear, for him to come out of it, and the Brits have got themselves in a difficult place on that does harm future significant deepening of relationships with Europe, although a certain amount of progress has been made, but it's been interesting work on mutual recognition of qualifications. Obviously, a lot of, and this was in the Versammlung we just had, around the new payment you have to make to come into the UK. Is it a visa or not? So all these tricky bilateral areas. I think the area where there was I found most fascinating is what we can learn from each other. Again, I'm just simplifying, but Germans having a problem with startups, Brits having a problem with scale-ups, and what do we do in that area? It's a very interesting discussion about areas that I wouldn't say I'm an expert on, critical minerals and rare earth, supply chains, and what we can do together in terms of lighthouse projects, issues around green technologies, where both countries have a reasonable, imperfect but not bad track record. So various other things I won't go into, but it was a really good discussion, and I was in a room of people who really knew their stuff, which was and had some very specific sectoral experience to bring to bear. Which brings me to my sort of general conclusions on this one. I mean, I've been probably, well, my first experience in Germany was in the 80s in Bonn and then in Ostberlin. But I mean, in my sort of more recent incarnation, it was, as many things are if you're a British European, it was triggered by Brexit and the referendum. And I just made a beeline for Germany straight afterwards, became a German citizen and sort of never left. And for me, it's always interesting and fun to see all my old British friends, whether it's in Germany or Britain. But one of the, I think, the problems that we all need to address with Königswinter is that we need to expand the talent pool, particularly in terms of people's expertise, because probably 90-95% of every year I see the same people, or I see people that I know, and I would like more to see people that I don't know. And I think that would be incredibly important. Like, there's whole areas, if you look at, I mean, Jane knows this very well, if you look at the Brits in Germany, there are whole sectors that have nothing to do with any of our organizations: creative industries, culture, knowledge economy, science, tech, research, a large amount of academia, some. And that's just as named, but a few. So there's a lot of work I think we can do to make, and too often conversations around in Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft, British-German Association, Königswinter, revolve around legacies of the Cold War, even of the Second World War, British Army on the Rhine, all this sort of thing, which is all fine and dandy, but it doesn't belong to this generation. It doesn't belong to our present set of concerns. So for me, the almost to sound a bit too much like sort of Tony Blair, it's all about modernization. I never thought I would say that. To me, it's all about sensible evolutionary modernization, so that we, there are so many hurdles on the road, multilateral hurdles. We know what they all are, but also bilateral and UK and Europe hurdles that are standing in our way. That said, there is a huge amount of potential in this relationship. I certainly got a sense, particularly now that, albeit a government that is struggling, at least in Britain, we have a grown-up government and a sensible government that is feeling its way far too cautiously, but at least it is trying to do the right thing. And so the potential is very good, but I do just stress this sense that we should use, in my view, the 75th to say, that was wonderful. Thank you, everybody, very much indeed. Now let's look to the future.
Thank you. Yeah. I think I can say myself that I'm a sort of old Königswinter hand. I've been to lots and lots of Königswinters. And I remember the first ones I used to go to. One of the sort of big shots who had enormous influence on the program was Ralph Dahrendorf. And Ralph used to insist that quite a large portion of people invited were academics, civil society people, and just independent people, independent thinkers, no matter what their job was. And then eventually that got rather lost. And from what I'm hearing and what you've all been saying, I suppose we need to make a special effort to reintroduce a few more sort of independent thinkers to the discussion, so that it's not just sort of voice network. The other thing, and that's just a question for you, John, would you share my impression that at this conference, there was very definitely an elephant in the room, and the elephant was Donald Trump. I'm saying this because last year and for the last perhaps 2 or 3 years, it was always China. China was the elephant in the room. Before that, for a while, there was an elephant in the room who was British Foreign Secretary and subsequently Prime Minister. I cannot possibly remember his name. And he was, it was very much about, what's he going to do, what's he doing, and so on. And then it was China for a while. And this year, it struck me that it was, in what I sort of sensed, it was very much, what's Donald Trump going to do? I mean, it's not surprising as he just taken office and so on. John, would you share that?
Oh, completely. And just to say, I mean, I think in a way, I mean, we all know what we think of the dangers, but there's also an opportunity that Europe can come together in all different ways. Militarily, we're beginning, again, 2 steps forward, 1.5 steps back, but we're beginning to see that, but also in so many other ways as well. I mean, it's important that these conferences don't become generic talking shops, that we don't just say, oh, China, oh, United States, let's just talk about that. We've actually got to come up with stuff. And this conference was very good in that. Come up with, again, whether it's read or not, is an, where at what level it is read. It's a very good discipline to say, why are we here? You could go in London and Berlin, you go to a think tank academic conference every day of the week, pretty much the whole time. But what is different and specific about Königswinter, about this gathering of people that that has a unique selling point in a way that if you were at the SVP or you're at Chatham House or this or that, you have exactly the same, or DGLP, you have exactly the same conversation. Just one very quick note that I forgot to say: young Königswinter, which I've been chairing 3 or 4, 5 years now. This year was absolute sea change in applications, which has brought with it problems because lots of people who just assumed they would have people accepted didn't. But we had just around 200 applications for only 45 slots, And of course, that brings with it a lot of disappointment, and it's understandable. That
And lots of work for that.
and a hell of a lot of work. There were 6 or 7 sort of long list and short list meetings, and we'll have to rationalise how we do it. But it's a nice problem to have, and I would, in some ways, obviously there's no application process for Königswinter, but I would like people to really, really feel that there's very high competition to come, rather than a sense, which I'm not saying this pertains, of sort of semi-entitlement. Oh, it's because I've always been, I go again. I think we're going to have a really, really exciting, I hope, conference.
Thank you. Thank you. The fact that you mentioned Chatham House just reminded me that I need to remind you why none of us have mentioned any names. None of us have said said such and such Königswinter. The simple reason is that it's conducted and has always been conducted under Chatham House rule. So you will not hear from us that somebody's specifically mentioned something. Right, any comments you've sort of thought of in the meantime? I mean, to all of you.
Looks like the
If
audience.
not, we'll let you turn to the audience, but I just wanted to give you a chance to, any of you have any further comments? I just have one additional comment. For a while, this was during the sort of the Brexit times at Königswinter. And in those days, we did have it in places where there was a bar available. We didn't have that this year. But in the evenings at the bar, UK delegates would sort of sidle up to one and say, you know, what about the dreadful European Union? Can't we have a special arrangement for UK and Germany or something? And we would, you know, whether we were government or non-government, we had to tell our friends from UK that no, you know, it's Brussels. And not Berlin. Now, this, of course, has stopped, not because we didn't have a bar, but because the issue has sort of gone away. And indeed, as you all know, we are, Germany and UK are negotiating for a new arrangement, which does not in any way touch on affairs that should be dealt with by Brussels and London. So, if I can't see you wanting to comment, so now it's up to you. Please raise your hands if you're in the room, and if you're online, just put a question in the chat, and Mary is ready to then read it out, and then we can try and deal with them. So, the lady right at the back.
Thank you very much.
Would you come forward to use the microphone? Otherwise, the people who are not in the room can't hear you.
I think you don't have to come all the way forward. I think if you stand close to the screen, it's.
If you're near the screen, perhaps it'll do.
I know it's a bit of a standard.
A little bit of exercise here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Teaches me next time. I'll sit further in front.
Yeah.
Can you hear me all right? Can somebody put their thumb up on the screen to let me know?
Yeah, they'll
complain.
They'll
They're
shout.
complain. All
They'll
right.
shout if they can't.
No, thank you very much. This was fascinating, and I hope this competitive process, calling for applications for the next Königswinter will open soon, and I'll, I do a very, convincing application form and motivation letter. But what I wanted to really know, and what I found absent was the mention of migration as an issue that, I was actually waiting for you, Mari, to mention it, and you didn't.
Yeah.
You talked about late trains and doctor's appointments, and maybe there's an underlying theme there. I mean, it's just something that also this new government in Germany is moving a little bit. And I've been in awe about the Labour government in Britain trying to rein in the subject so much, whereas here, just the recent Parteitag of the SPD showed that there's still some movement even within the coalition. So I think this is something I'd be interested to hear, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Would like to.
I can say something about that. So there was, I think, partly the reason that it wasn't discussed in great detail is that we had a whole session on it at last year's Königswinter Conference in October, where we discussed it, like I said, in detail, and also quite, we had a lot of varying opinions, of course, as you can imagine, it's not the most easy topic to discuss. And partly it was also said that because, we could only cover so many things and, such a short period of time that really sort of needed, its own discussion and should definitely be brought back into the program at a future conference to sort of, have a bigger discussion and in more detail, but generally, it was sort of put to the side a little bit. I agree with you. It is, of course, also having, a large effect on a lot of the issues that I mentioned. But I think, and like I said, we sort of moved a little bit more to, sort of the threat that, parties who don't want to play by the rules, pose to democracy. We talked about, the role of constitutional courts. We talked about the Brandmauer and if it's a helpful concept or perhaps not. And I think ultimately we sort of said, of course, it's very important to defend the foundations of our democracies, but also, sort of reimagine the actual practice so that, people do feel confident again that, their governments can deliver what they promised in their manifestos.
Thank you. Patrick.
Well, I would like to address two elephants in the room. I wonder if one element in the room was the special relationship of the UK to the US. You mentioned Trump, but there we could observe in the past some ambiguity with the Brits. Was that discussed? And the other elephant in the room deals with the Reform UK. Did the conference, was the conference before or after the local elections in Great Britain? That could be a major impact because the situation, as I understand it, has changed from the general elections in the UK and the local elections, which were disastrous for the Conservatives and not very nice to the Labour. They were very nice for the Lib Dems.
Would you like to address the issue?
The interesting thing about the local, so the conference this year was after the local elections, but I had a very strong sense in the May elections this year. So we had local elections in England this year. We will have more elections next year in Scotland and Wales. But it was very much like the 2019 European Parliament elections. So that was an election that the UK in a sense wasn't supposed to be part of, because if we were going to leave, the idea was we'd have left in March 2019, so no elections. And the 2019 European Parliament elections became a competition between the Brexit Party, which had been the UK Independence Party and is now effectively the Reform Party. It's always Nigel Farage, funded by broadly the same people, and the Liberal Democrats. So we were campaigning in 2019 to stop Brexit. And it was actually very much the same two parties. And why were we there? Precisely because there is a sense that there isn't adequate legitimacy at the moment, that the Conservatives have clearly failed. There isn't a great sense that the Labour Party is really delivering. So yes, it got a large majority last year, but it got a large majority on low turnout. And so we're in a really difficult position. And the point that Mary said about, well, some of our German friends said, well, you just wait a couple of years. That's the real danger in the UK. The AfD and Reform UK aren't the same. But the slightly worrying thing I read this morning or yesterday, Nigel Farage has just done a big interview in the Sunday Times where he's basically saying, well, you need to think kindly on me almost, because if not me, then what comes after me is much worse. And
Which is the Putin argument.
yeah, he is not as illiberal as some of the far right parties. He's not Marine Le Pen, he's not Alice Weidel, but a lot of the policies he is willing to put forward are policies that most of us who believe in the liberal international order can support. So we are in a different position because we still have a first past the post electoral system. And when it was a 2.5 party system, then fringe parties couldn't get through.
Yeah.
Now we effectively have a 5-party system. Conservative, well, no, Labour, Reform. The Conservatives are a rump party. The Liberal Democrats and the Greens, and then in Scotland and Wales, we've got the Nationalists. So it's a really difficult time, and I suppose Nigel Farage would probably be saying, well, no, my daughter's got German citizenship. Are you sure I shouldn't have been at Königswinter?
We've been discussing it, I don't know.
So, you know, Donald Trump, going back, has a German ancestors.
Trump's grandfather was refused re-entry because it was a problem.
Yes.
So he was not done.
So on your first question regarding the special relationship, as I recall the conference, we were actually delighted to take record, can we put it that way, to take record of the extraordinary amount of pro-European work the British government under Sir Keir Starmer has been doing in good faith.
Yeah.
And our appreciation of this beyond Königswinter and I would say the German government in Europe is that the UK is one of the nuclear powers in Europe, and that counts. Hence, I'd say there was no mood, no inclination to question, shall I say, double standard. On the contrary, the fact that, as I certainly recall it, Keir Starmer broke the ice in terms of cultural affinity with the American president, kind of set the tone going forward for the rest of Europe. And that is one of the very creative achievements of the special relationship, that an American cannot talk in a differential way to a British person, to an English person. They speak the same language, or it's divided by the same language, but still the dynamic is and was a good one. And given that there has been an invitation from His Royal Highness, is also helpful. Hence, in conclusion, I think the special relationship this time around is extremely helpful. And that was kind of the sense I got.
Okay.
With that, I will have to say goodnight.
Do we have any questions from the chat? No, we don't. And I think we should come to.
Yes.
Yeah, Peter.
I've got 2 questions. Actually, on your session, which sounded very interesting, Mark. First question is, during your discussion and the different issues that you discussed, was there much focus on youth and young people? That's one question. And then the second question is, obviously you were talking about polarization, etc., in both societies. You didn't talk that much about what solutions you came up with. Can you talk about those at all?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked the question about young people, because as you kind of mentioned, I was probably the youngest person in that room. And also I have to say, I was of course also organizing the conference. So, I was mostly there for the second day of those discussions, and most of the discussions in the working groups. No, like I said, not mostly, but not, mostly, not always. But
you were the second youngest.
No, I was talking about myself. I was trying to convey that it was, well, a much younger person than.
So at some
Quite
point,
fast.
and perhaps, perhaps I was mistaken, but at some point towards the end of the afternoon, I stood up and I sort of said, you've talked a lot about, the various problems that, we face and that are, partly the reason why people sort of lose trust and sort of, stop believing in their government's ability to deliver. The one topic you have not talked about yet is housing. And that's why I mentioned it earlier, and I always say this at the Königswinter conferences, no matter whether, it's the economic Königswinter conference, and usually it ends up being me, perhaps because I'm just so scared by the Berlin rental market, I don't know. And I always say, we can't talk about this without mentioning housing, especially for young people. This has become such a massive issue. You can't move anymore. You can barely afford your rent. You're scared of either getting kicked out because then, you will never be able to find something, that is as cheap as what you're currently paying, which is of course already, very hard to afford anyway. And it's definitely making people lose the sort of belief in government's ability to deliver, and at the same time, there's of course also that sort of generational, understanding, right? Because young people do find it a lot harder to find affordable housing than their parents would have at the same age back in the day. So that's something that I mention, and usually, as always, when I do mention it, and I do offer various solutions, again, those are my personal view, people say, yes, you're right, it's a very big problem, and then they move on. Which I think sort of also sums up the current approach of our two governments to the housing problem itself. Because you have to have some very serious conversations, I think, if you actually want to tackle this. And I don't think that is building more housing, because we see it in Berlin, there's more housing being built, it's just not affordable, right? So that's the one thing. The other thing on general solutions, so we did talk about, like I said, for example, defensive strategies like the constitutional courts. We sort of said the Brandmauer probably, can probably not be kept up, let's put it that way. But at the same time, we did also say it's probably not a great idea for the center-right parties to sort of think, oh, we're just going to try and accommodate, the far right by sort of moving in that direction, because people usually vote for the original over the copy. What we did talk about was procedural legitimacy, so involve people more in decision making, for example, citizens' juries, but also the citizens' assemblies that we hear a lot about. So people get more of a feeling of, I am being involved in it, it's not just being imposed on me. Output legitimacy, like I said, is under strain, and I think, I'm not sure how much this applies to the UK side, but there was a feeling that in Germany there's probably quite a broad sense of agreement on those issues. So perhaps, to put it that way, perhaps the government should just do something about it. Perhaps people are actually quite, there is consensus on certain solutions. Perhaps maybe the governments are just too scared to spend the political capital on actually, tackling these issues. And then what people also said, communication is important. Populists have changed the way we talk about politics. Populists have changed the way people understand what they think is happening. And of course, it also changes the way that how people understand what politics can actually deliver and what people are promising, what they may not actually be able to deliver. And that's just, communication's a big issue.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've sort of come to the end of our time. This has been very interesting indeed. I'd like to finish actually on a fairly somber note. You mentioned that part of the conversation was about the nuclear deterrent and our dependence on the US in this matter. When I first started going to Königswinter in the 1990s, if somebody had brought up the issue of nuclear deterrent, everybody else would have said, "Are you mad? We got over that." There were strange people talking about the end of history, and that we've had to come back to. And of course, you're absolutely right in saying what we did. That we've come back to that point where we need to talk about these very, very serious issues just shows us that times have changed and we better live up to it. I think we did actually at Königswinter, unlike other conferences I've been to where people still love to talk about the problems of yesterday.
And that will increase.
We did
because of the
actually talk about the
deployment of
problems
the
of today.
foreign bonds.
But we will have to continue doing so. So, thank you very much, Julie. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, John, for joining us. Thank you all for joining us. Those of you who want to listen to it again can do so. Yeah, stay with us for the activities of the German-British Society of Deutsch-British Gesellschaft. Thank you.
So, there is a very big the working institute for modern music. But to speak about the question in the UK, but also has I first in where I live. So I was just said, well, let me hear people I'm better than living. You might be having a meeting in Berlin, so really that. It does mean that there are people very interested in